only a little bit of the story, so hardly anybody has the big picture. And then, of course, security tests, security oaths, fines, and ultimately threats.
There's a section called Constitutional and Domestic Issues, and it states,
in dealing with clear violations of civic law and guarantees as defined under the Constitution, it has been discussed among members of Majestic 12 that such protection of individual rights are outweighed by the nature of the threat.
Clearly, they thought that ETs landing or being involved in the American citizenry was so important that they would control, capture, and manage every aspect of that interaction.
It's a very interesting group of people. 6 civilian, 6 military, 2 Air Force, 2 Army, 2 Navy. And some of them were very well known, but some of them weren't very well known, but turned out to be perfectly appropriate.
As President-elect Dwight Eisenhower was preparing to take office, he was briefed about the ongoing UFO investigations of this elite group.
I believe the Eisenhower briefing document is genuine. The list of members, I thought that would indicate it was phony because Dr. Donald Menzel, a Harvard University professor of astronomy, was listed as a member. But he was a total skeptic. He wrote 3 anti-UFO books. You certainly don't need a security clearance to teach astronomy at Harvard.
First of all, the objects are not unidentified. We know what they are. Second, in most cases, are not flying. And finally, in many cases, they are not even material objects.
I discovered, to my total amazement, that he led a double life, that he worked with the National Security Agency, worked with the CIA, had a top-secret ultra clearance, did classified work for 30 companies. None of this was known.
By the time Eisenhower read this above top-secret document, the founder of the Majestic 12, James Forrestal, was dead. In March of 1949, he was diagnosed with depression and ordered to the Bethesda Naval Hospital. He was isolated and feared for his life. On May 22nd, his body was found below his hospital window. His death was ruled a suicide, but this CIA memo tells a different story.
The untimely death of Secretary Forrestal was deemed necessary and regrettable.
If it should ever be possible to prove that the documents are true, then obviously they indicate a very, very different history than we thought. They indicate layers of government we don't know exist. They indicate procedures of government that seem anti-constitutional. They paint a picture of a world that is wildly different than the average person expects. And of course also a world in which there are aliens flying around and being captured and studied by government forces. It's a very odd picture indeed.
I'm convinced, based upon the evidence that's building up, that something very strange has happened, that the number of sightings of all types are just out of all proportion to something that, if it's not real, there's something very, very strange going on. So it is the preponderance of evidence. It is the old-timers coming forward. It is the documents that Bob and Ryan Wood are putting together that with powerful forensic research make a very, very powerful case. It's hard to ignore.
We have selected the techniques that question document examiners use, and we've hired some question document examiners, and those techniques are very powerful because they permit a judge in a courtroom to tell the difference between a genuine document and a fake document.
The degrees of authenticity can be determined by comparison of the specialized stamps, file numbers, date formats, line spacing, and paragraphing with known authentic archival documents. File markings are often particularly telling. Some of the documents have misspelled words. Does this mean they're frauds? We don't think so. These originals are probably rough drafts, which would have typos and temporary spellings until the final draft was complete.
One of the things that question document examiners do to authenticate documents is to look at the type. And so when you study the typography and become familiar with how the hot lead printing presses of that era worked, you find that once every so often there was a letter Z that was raised because it was not commonly used. We found a document from that era that shows a raised Z, and we have in our own document about every third Z is raised. This is just exactly the kind of thing that telegraphs authenticity.
If you're talking about leaked documents, the provenance of leaked documents, we need to know where they've come from. We need to see the originals, and one has to admit that in 99% of cases we do not see the originals.
We have several documents that are original pages. These permit testing that cannot be done with copies. For example, we can date a document by analyzing its ink. A small sample is punched out, leaving a pinhole in the paper. The ink is then dissolved, and by using liquid chromatography, the colors are compared with a standard library of inks. The imprint made by the individual typewriter keys can be used to compare with a library of typewriter fonts. The watermark on the paper can often be found and dated. Sometimes we can even see through the blacked out areas and decipher the hidden words.
During the authentication process of the Eisenhower briefing document, Stan Friedman went to the National Archives and in the presence of an archivist found in their files what's known as the Cutler-Twining Memo, which mentions MJ-12, MJ-12 Special Studies Group. We have an original onion skin paper with the appropriate watermarks, original declassification markings. It is a hard, physical, testable piece of paper. It's in a secure facility at our National Archives in College Park, Maryland.
This declassified document seems to provide proof that MJ-12 was a reality, even though the government has never acknowledged its existence.
So, after you use these question document techniques, to the best of your ability, it turns out that the documents almost speak for themselves as being genuine.
If the majestic documents are real, they provide new insight into perhaps the most closely guarded secret in the history of the world, a secret that has been fiercely protected for a very long time.
I think that government secrecy, classifying this information at what amounts to an above top secret level, was absolutely warranted in 1947, and maybe earlier, because I think all this business got started perhaps during the Second World War.
It is the recommendation of the President's Special Panel, with concurrence from Majestic 12, that a policy of strict denial of the events surfacing from Roswell, New Mexico, and any other incident of such caliber be enforced. An interactive program of controlled releases to the media, in such fashion to discredit any civilian investigation, be instituted in accordance with the provisions of the 1947 National Security Act.
Certainly in 1947, the government could not afford to tell the world. They could not afford to say, look, there are these alien spacecraft penetrating our airspace. We don't know where